Hi, Class 110. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about schools and social work and healthcare and social work. First, I'm just going to tell you some of the things that they have in common. That's kind of why I'm combining them. So, the major thing is that there are not many social workers in a hospital, and there are not many, or a nursing home, and there are not many social workers in schools. There are more school social workers today, but when I was one 18 years ago, we had maybe one per district. Now you'll find districts with two or three, and that's great. A couple even have more. But basically, if you think about a huge school district with teachers and principals and everything, you end up with a handful of school nurses and one or a handful of social workers. That's it. So similar with hospitals, lots and lots and lots of nurses and aides and CNAs, but only a handful of social workers, sometimes even less than a handful. So that's what's really unique in those two situations. Social workers there are in kind of by themselves. They have a different set of professional ethics that they have to live by. They have different standards. Teachers and schools are about education, not mental health and not resources. And hospitals, nursing homes are about healthcare and getting people well and taking care of them, not about necessarily developing resources and better mental health. So they're not at opposing points, they're just not, social workers are just somewhat unique. I think you probably get the point by now. When you think about schools, I want you to think about for a second here your best memory of school and your worst memory of school. And if you think about that worst for a minute, would a social worker have helped you? Did you have a social worker when you had a bad time at school? I think if most of us think back to a troubled time in school, how cool would that have been to have a social worker? Somebody who could either help your family, help you and your family to get outside resources that you need, or if you were struggling with something, to really talk. Guidance counselors can sort of do that, but it's a little bit different. They also have to help you with classwork. Where a social worker could just directly talk to you about bullying or a boyfriend and girlfriend, and they have confidentiality around them. So, just thinking about that, it's one of the reasons I went into school social work. I really loved that there was a different thing every day, that students had all kinds of different needs, including their families. So I really liked that part. Um, Social workers in schools and hospitals bring a perspective to the treatment team. So in hospitals, doctors, nurses, anesthesiologists on the treatment team. In schools, you have teachers, maybe a principal, maybe a guidance counselor on the treatment team. And social workers bring something different. They don't bring the educational or the medical component. They bring outside resources. So when the student needs things outside of school, they know where the family can turn. Or if someone is being discharged from the hospital or a nursing home or a treatment facility, they know what's out there in the community. So they bring that part to the discussion. And similar to what we've talked about in other things, we social workers bring that cultural dimension. They can help educate the educators or the medical profession about cultural impacts, religious impacts, ethnic impacts that could be impacting the student or the patient. So they bring that part in. They help to bring awareness to what's going on in that student or that patient's community. They're the only ones that are able to do that. And they are the only ones who leave. Social workers often go out into the community if they work for a hospital. They're doing education, they're looking at resources, they might go actually to someone's home to assess them. School social workers go out frequently. They're going around to different agencies. They take students for appointments if they have to. They might be in the county dealing with the mental health department or talking to children and youth. So they are the outside person that gets to bring some things on the inside. So, like all history, social workers in schools began with a good idea. In one school district, I believe it started in Connecticut and then in New York, where in New York, settlement house people started to realize that some of the people they worked with had limited English, and that was a problem in schools. So they started working with the schools. In Connecticut, I believe they were having attendance problems or something in the early 1900s, and they had social workers go out, or a person go out into the community to find out why the kids weren't in school. Both of those ideas seem to have hit around the same time, and it became a new idea. Let's have social workers in schools that can help connect resources and also can be truancy officers. They were originally a lot of the truancy officers. In terms of medical, I mean, social workers kind of went back, like I told you, in the mid to late 1800s. They were kind of that place that people went, the person they went to, if they were going to check into a hospital to see if they had enough money for care. Keep in mind, we did not have insurance in this country really for most people until the early 1960s. Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to get universal health care in the Social Security Act. He wasn't able to get it because the lobbying from doctors, professional groups, and whatnot against that insurance was so strong. Different companies tried to get insurance, but doctors really liked the way it was. They took cash or checks, and there was no insurance. But by the 60s, we had so much medical care available out there, and we were becoming more of an industrial complex here. So people needed to offset salaries and things. So insurance became an option within the world. And so you start to see in healthcare that social workers had that role. They started to either become available as some way that insurance paid for social workers, or they were the ones that were helping people who didn't have insurance figure out a way to pay their medical bills. So that's kind of where that came around. There was a big act since 70s were the big time. I will just say in education, the big IDEA passed in 1975, and that is when they started to realize that students who had learning disabilities or behavioral disabilities or anything needed to have rights. And they developed rights for those people, and they were allowed to then have an IEP. Maybe some of you even had one, an individual education plan. That means that certain people on a treatment team in a school sit down and figure out what that student is going to need. And sometimes social workers are necessary to be a part of that. They might provide counseling to a student. I used to do groups with children who were on the spectrum, especially with kids diagnosed at the time with Asperger's. We would do social skills groups. So that was a big time that things changed with schools. I'm just want to double check and make sure I'm not forgetting anything here about that. Just the one other thing I wanted to say about schools is just something for you all to know. The McKinney-Vento Act that was passed, I think it was in the 1980s, has to do with specific to social workers and kids in schools who end up being homeless. What was happening is if you ended up in foster care or you ended up homeless or anything, wherever you ended up, that was where you went to school. So if you were a Pennsbury student and you ended up in a foster home in Quakertown, you had to go to school in Quakertown. If you were a Central Bucks student and you ended up without a home and were at the shelter in Bristol Township, you had to go to Bristol Township. McKinney-Vento said that students had to stay in their home schools. So the school that you came from is responsible to come and get you. And they have to deliver you back to that home school so you still have, despite whatever else is happening in your life, you still have that teacher with you, you have your friends with you, and they realized, how important that was to keep that stability for a student. Just want to check and make sure that I am not forgetting anything about healthcare that's different. And I guess the one difference would be that social workers also work in the medical profession, helping to deliver palliative and hospice care. So that's an end-of-life issue. Palliative care is to keep people comfortable, and hospice care is they usually prescribe that from a doctor when you're within 6 months of when they believe you will pass. And social workers go in to counsel not just the patient, but also the patient's family. They also help to make sure that while that patient is home or before they get discharged, that the right kind of medical services are going to be delivered to that home. I think that's mostly what I wanted to say about that. Yeah. So, and I just to keep this part clear, I'll tell you one more thing. This is just for your own information. Medicaid and Medicare. So social workers deal with that all the time. Medicare is something that generally is out there for senior citizens or people who have long-term disabilities. Medicaid is generally for people under a certain income. I try to remember that by thinking that like when it's care, we're caring for our elderly, our grandparents, and when it's Medicaid, the word aid is in there. We're providing aid to everyone. So anybody can be eligible for that. All right. Well, thanks. I will put a couple questions in the lecture, and there's some other things about healthcare and education in the assignments. Thanks, everybody.